Okay, so as promised, here is our overview of the Superstar worksheet that we started in class today. So I'm going to be working through each of these equations here on the right, 1 through 18, and I'm going to be solving them with each of the steps as we have done in class. So I have a piece of notebook paper that I will be working them as we go. So I'm going to scroll down to my notebook paper that you most likely started in class. So the first step is going to be to properly write each of the equations. So number 1, we have 5x plus 6 equals 2x plus 15. So as we go through this video, I'm going to be putting a box around my variables and a circle around my constant numbers. Constant. And so as we go through, we're going to have a box around 5x, circle around my constant, and then I'm going to draw a line down my equal sign to separate the sides. Then I'm going to do a box and a circle. So as we have been solving equations in class, we have been answering 4 questions, and the first one is pertaining to like terms on the same side of the equal sign. And as we can see here, we have a variable and we have a constant, which are not like terms on the left side of the equal sign, and then we have a variable and a constant. So the answer to our first question is a no. So that means we're going down to our second question, which is variables on both sides. So we can see here our variables that are circles. We have our variable here, 5x, and we have a 2x. So since we have one on each side of the equal sign, we're going to find our least coefficient and move it. So I'm going to, as we go throughout this video, I'm going to be highlighting in yellow the least coefficient. So we have 2 coefficients, and our least is going to be our 2x here, the 2. So our least coefficient is here, so we're going to move it to the other side by doing our inverse. So it's a positive 2x, so I will subtract 2x from each side to keep my equation balanced. And this will become a 0, and then we're going to rewrite our equation as follows. So 5x minus 2x is going to leave us with 3x, and then we have to make sure to bring down our plus 6, and that's going to equal 15. So that answers our second question about variables. Our third is about constant numbers on both sides. So we can see here we have a constant here and a constant here. So the answer to that question would be a yes. And on the inside of our foldable, we are going to move the variable that's on the same side as our variable. Move our constant that's on the same side as the variable. So that's going to take us minus 6 to both sides. The one on the left is going to become 0. And then we're going to be left with 3x equals 9. And our very last step is going to be division. Since we have a coefficient other than 1, we're going to have to divide both sides by our coefficient. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so we'll be left with an x. And 9 divided by 3 is 3. And that will leave you for your final answer. All right, so for number 1, that's where we're at. So I'm going to move my page over and do number 2. So we have 7x minus 4 equals 20 plus 3x. So again, we're going to box and circle, and so our first question about like terms, we have no like terms on the left and we have no like terms on the right. So that means we're going to move to our second about variables on both sides, and we do have variables on both sides. We have 7x and 3x. So we're going to have to find our least coefficient and move it. So that is going to be, I lost my color, 20, sorry about that, 20 plus 3x, let me fix that. We have our least coefficient right here, 3x. So that is our one that we're going to move by the inverse operation. So 3x minus 3x is 0, and then we're going to rewrite accordingly. 7x minus 3x is 4x minus 4 equals 20. So that takes us to our third question about constants on each side. So we do have constant numbers. We have a -4 and we have a 20. So from here, we're going to find the constant number that's on the same side as the variable, which is this one here. We're going to move it to the other side by its inverse operation. So we add 4 to this side and we add 4 to this side. We have -4 plus 4 will give us 0. And then we'll be left with 4x on this side equals 20 plus 4, which is 24. And our last step is to divide. Since we have a coefficient other than 1, we're going to divide by our coefficient of 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, and we'll be left with x equals 24 divided by 4, which is 6. So I'm going to move on up for number 3. Number 3 reads 2x plus 15 equals 43 minus 5x. So we're going to box variables, circle constants, draw a line to separate, circle a constant, and box a variable. So this one's a little bit tricky. So we are not needing to combine any like terms on the left side of the equation, equal sign, or on the right. So we're going to go down to our second question, which is about variables. And we do see variables on both sides. We have this one and this one. And that is going to leave us with finding our least coefficient. So we have a 2 as a coefficient, and we have a 2, and we have a -5. So our -5 is going to be our least coefficient. So we're going to move this by doing the inverse. So plus 5x, and if we add 5x to that side, we have to add 5x to this side. -5x plus 5x is going to be 0. And then we will simplify down. 2x plus 5x will be 7x. And we'll bring down our plus 15 equals 43. So here we go. And then we're going to go to our third question, which is about constant numbers. So we have a constant number here, and we have a constant number here. And we will we're going to find the number that's on the same side as the variable, which is going to be this plus 15, and move it away from our variable. So subtract 15. This will become 0. And we will carry down our 7x, and then 43 minus 15 is going to be 28. Divide both sides by 7, our coefficient of 7, and we're going to be left with x equals 4. All right, number 4 is 3 plus 4x equals 9x plus 13. Here we're going to circle a constant, box a variable, draw a line, box a variable, and circle a constant. So as we're looking here, we don't have any like terms on the left or right, so that will move us to finding our least coefficient and to move it. So our least coefficient is going to be this 4. So it's a positive 4, and that will put us with subtracting 4x from each side. So 4x minus 4x is going to be 0. So we're going to rewrite our equation as follows. So 3 will come down, equals 9x minus 4x is going to be 5x, and we still have that plus 13. So now we are dealing with our third question about constants on both sides. So if we have a constant number, we have a 3 and we have a 13, we're supposed to find the constant that's on the same side as the variable and move it by changing its sign. So 13 minus 13 is 0, and if to keep my equation balanced, I have to subtract 13 from both sides. So now we have 3 minus 13 is going to be a negative 10, and we're left with our 5x on this side. And we're down to our last step, which is to divide by our coefficient, and we're left with x equals negative 2. Okay, moving on to our next problem, which is number 5. Number 5 reads 2x minus 10 equals 44 plus 8x. So we're going to go ahead and box and circle accordingly. Circle and box for our variable. And again, we don't see any like terms on the left or like terms on the right, so that takes us to our second question, which is variables on both sides. So we have a variable with 2x and we have 8x, so we're going to want to identify our least coefficient, which is going to be our 2, because 2 is smaller than 8. So that will have us subtracting 2x from both sides. This will become 0, and we'll be left with negative 10 equals 44 plus 6x. So now we're down to our third question about constants on both sides. We're going to see here we have a 44 and we have a negative 10. And if we see this 44 is the one that's on the same side as the variable, so we're going to have to subtract this 44 from both sides. This will become our 0, and we'll be left with 6x equals, so negative 10 minus 44. So that means we already start at negative 10, and we're going 44 more away from that. So we're going to end with a negative 54, and you can check me on a calculator. And that is going to leave us with negative 54 equals 6x. And when I divide both sides on our last question, dividing by our coefficient, which is 6, 6 divided by 6 is 1, and we'll be left with negative 54 divided by 6, which is a negative 9. Okay, moving to number 6. We have negative 7x minus 2 equals 24 minus 9x. So I'm going to go ahead and box my variables, circle my constants, draw my line to separate the equal sign, circle my constant and box my variable. So right now we're needing to see if we have any like terms to combine, and that is a no. But we do have a variable on both sides. We have negative 7x and we have negative 9x. So it's important here to look at what our least coefficient is going to be. So we have a negative 7 and a negative 9. And so I don't know about you, but I would rather have negative $7 than negative $9, because negative 9 is a smaller value than negative 7. So once I add 9x to both sides, This will become 0, and we'll be left with negative 7 plus 9x, which is 2x, and then continue to rewrite what I have here. So we are down to our question about constants on both sides, and we do have a constant number on both sides. So that will have us find the constant that's on the same side of the variable, which is this minus 2. So since this is a minus 2, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. This will become 0, and we will carry down what we have left. So we have 2x equals 26. 24 plus 2 is 26. And our last step, since our coefficient is something other than 1, our coefficient right now is 2. We're going to divide both sides by our coefficient. This will become 1, and we will have x equals 13. All right, new page. We're on to number 7. Number 7 reads 27 minus 11x equals x minus 33. So we're going to circle, box, draw a line on the equal sign, box, and circle. So again, we don't have any like terms on the left and the right, so that is going to have us see if we have variables, which we do. We have an x on both sides of the equal sign. So then we have to find the coefficient that is the least. So we have, again, we have this imaginary 1 right here. It's not imaginary, we just don't write it. So we need to determine whether negative 11 or 1 is smaller. So we know that negative 11 is smaller than 1. So that will cause us to add 11x to both sides. This will become our 0, and we're going to rewrite as follows. So 27 equals 1 plus 11 will have us be at 12x minus 33. Then we're down to our constants on both sides. So we have a constant, we have a 27 and a minus 33. So the 33 is on the side of the x, so that means that's the one we're going to want to move. So negative 33 plus 33 is 0, and we're left with 12x equals 60. And now our last step is to divide by our coefficient, which is 12. So we're going to divide both sides by 12. And this becomes 1. So we're left with x equals, and 60 divided by 12 is 5. All right, moving on to number 8. Number 8 reads 21x plus 6 equals 17x minus 26. Almost ran out of room. So go ahead and circle and box. Box our variable, circle a constant, draw a line on the equal sign. Box a variable, circle a constant. So again, we have no like terms that we need to combine on the left or the right side of the equal sign, so that leaves us with finding our least coefficient since we have variables on both sides of the equal sign. So which one is smaller, 21 or 17? And that's easy, we have 17. So this is a positive 17, so in order to get our 17x with our 21x, we're going to have to subtract 17x from both sides. So this will become 0, and this will become 4x plus 6 equals negative 26. So it's really important to, if I have a negative in front, it needs to stay with our sign. So now we're down to our constants. So we have a constant 6 and we have a constant negative 26, and the 6 is on the same side as the variable right here next to it, this 4x. So that means the 6 has got to go, and we're going to do that by performing a inverse operation. So minus 6 on both sides. This becomes 0, and we're left with 4x equals a negative 32. So now our last step, since our coefficient is something other than 1, is to divide by our coefficient of 4, and we're left with x equals negative 8. All right, number 9. We have 11x equals 8x minus 6. So I'm going to go ahead and box my variable, draw my line on my equal sign, box my variable, and circle my constant. So our first step is like terms, but we don't have any like terms on the left or the right. So then our second is to identify if we have variables on both sides, and we have a variable here and a variable here. So that means we're going to have to find our least coefficient, and our least coefficient is going to be here because 8 is smaller than 11. So I'm going to then subtract 8x from both sides. So this will become our 0 pair, and 11 minus 8 is going to be a 3x equals, and we still have our negative 6 over here. So our third step would be to find if constants, but we only have constants here on the right. So that means we get to go down to our last step, which is to divide by our coefficient, since we have a coefficient other than 1. So we're looking at x equals a negative 2. So that became 1. Okay, number 10. Negative x minus 29 equals 13 plus 2x. So I'm going to box my variable, circle my constant, draw my line on my equal sign, circle my constant, and box my variable. So again, no like terms to combine, so that means we're going to be looking for our least coefficient. So this one is tricky because we have this negative here, but we have to remember there is a 1 here, and negative 1 is smaller than 2. So we're going to then move it by it's performing our inverse operation. I'll write that 1x so you can see. So plus 1x. This becomes 0, and we're left with, on the left, negative 29 equals 13, and then 2 plus 1 is 3x. So now we have our third step, which is to see if we have constants on both sides, which we do. We have a 13 and a negative 29, both separated by our equal sign. And so we're going to find the constant that's on the same side as the variable, which is this 13. So this is a positive 13, so I'm going to have to subtract 13. This becomes 0. And now this is tricky. This is where I've seen some problems come. So on your calculator or in your mind, whatever you prefer, you're going to have to put in a negative 29, and then you're going to have to subtract 13. So that's going to put you at a negative 42. And we still have on this side a 3x. So we're almost done. Now we're going to divide both sides by our coefficient of 3. This will become 1, we'll be left with an x. And negative 42 divided by 3 is going to be our negative 14, because a negative divided by a positive is still a negative. All right, I have to add a page. We are on to number 11, which reads negative 18 plus 5x equals negative 12x minus 1. So you're probably used to it by now. Circle your constants, box your variables, draw your line, box your variables, circle your constant, and making sure to include the signs before. So again, no like terms to combine, but we have variables on both sides. We have a 5x and we have a negative 12x, and we're going to have to identify our least coefficient, and our least coefficient is going to be here, this negative 12, because negative 12 is smaller than 5. So as I add 12x to both sides to keep my equation balanced, this will become 0, and 5 plus 12 is 17x, and again we have our negative 18 over here, so we have to make sure to bring that down, and we still have our negative 1. So now we're to our third step, which is constants on both sides, and we have a constant on this side. The 18 is on the same side as the variable, so I'm going to add 18 to both sides. This will become 0, and we'll be left with 17x equals 17. So now we just have to divide by our coefficient of 17. This becomes 1, and luckily 17 divided by 17 is also 1, and that is where we're going to end. So number 12. Negative 9x minus 21 equals 35 minus x. So we're going to box, circle, line, circle, box. And I'm going to move a little quicker. I'm running out of time. So we're going to identify our least coefficient. So negative 9 is smaller than, remember we have a 1 here, so negative 9 is smaller than negative 1, so that is the one we're going to be moving. So plus 9x to each side. This will become 0. We'll be left with negative 21 equals 35, and negative 1 plus 9 is going to be plus 8x. And then we're going to move the constant that's on the same side as the variable, since we have constants on both sides. So that's going to take negative 30, we're going to have to subtract 35 from both sides, get our 0. So negative 21 minus 35, we're going to have a negative 56 equals 8x. And then we divide both sides by our coefficient. This becomes 1, and we're left with x equals negative 7. Alrighty, number 13. 7x minus 2 equals negative 2x minus 29. So we're going to box and circle, line, box our variable, circle our constant. And then we're going to find our least coefficient, which is right here. We're going to then add 2x to both sides. This will become 0, and we'll be left with 9x minus 2 equals negative 29. So then we have to find the constant that's on the same side as the variable, and we're going to add it. We're going to add 2 to both sides. This will become 0, and we're left with 9x equals negative 29 plus 2. So it's going to move us closer to 0, which is a negative 27. So we then divide by our coefficient of 9, and we'll be left with x equals a negative 3. Number 14, 36 plus 15x equals 17x. All right, so circle, box, line, and box. So we have variables on both sides, so that means there is a coefficient that's smaller, and that's the 15x. So we're going to move that 15x over. All right, we'll be left with a 0 here, and now we have 36 equals 2x. Divide both sides by 2. We'll be left with 1 over here, and x will equal 18. All righty. 15. All right, I'm gonna alrighty here. So no like terms, so we got to find our least coefficient. -4 is our smallest, so we're going to add 4x to both sides. So then we'll be left with -15. This will become 0. We'll be left with -15 equals 6 plus x, because -3 plus 4 is just a 1. So then we have to find our constant that's on the same side as the variable. And this will become 0, and we'll be left with x equals a -21. All right, number 16. 12x minus 9 equals 8x minus 37. So this is our box, our circle, our line, box our variables, circle our constant. So now we have no like terms, but we do have variables on both sides. So it means we need to identify our least coefficient, which is 8. And then we're going to subtract 8x from both sides. This will become 0. And we will then simplify down. 12x minus 8 is 4x minus 9 equals -37. Because we have to include this sign here, this one, right? And then we have to have, since we have constants on both sides, we have to find the constant that's with the variable, which is this 9, and add it to both sides. This will become 0. We'll be left with 4x equals -37 plus 9. So is a -28. Divide both sides by our coefficient of 4, and we'll be left with x equals -7. And that is your answer there. All right, and we're almost done. Number 17, -5x plus 40 equals 6x minus 70. So I'm going to box, circle, line, box, circle. So we're going to no like terms, but we do have variables, so we're going to identify our least coefficient, and that's -5. So we're going to then add 5x to both sides. This is going to become 0, and we'll be left with 40 equals 11x minus 70. And then from there, we have to, since we have constants on both sides, we're going to add 70. Since that 70 is with the variable, this will become 0, and we'll be left with 11x equals 40 plus 70, which is 110. So we will then divide both sides by our coefficient, since we have a coefficient other than 1. 11 divided by 11 is 1, and we'll be left with x equals 10. And our last problem is going to be -x minus 2 equals 1 minus 2x. So box our variable, circle our constant, draw my line, circle constant, box variable. And now we have to, again, no like terms, but we do have coefficients on both sides and variables. So we need to identify our least coefficient. And -2 is smaller than -1, so that's the one we're going to move. So we're going to add 2x to both sides. This will become 0, and we'll be left with x minus 2, because -1 plus 2 is 1. And then we have constants on both sides. We have a -2 and a 1. So we need to move the one that is with our variable, because we want the variable to be by itself. So this will become 0, and we'll be left with x equals 3. Sorry that I sped up so much at the end, but I have a class coming in, so I hope this helps. And that takes you to the end of your Superstar worksheet.